Game Breaker TV.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this special edition of Legendary. We got an interview with Greg Street. Joining me today for the interview is Mr. Josh Allen, of course, from Legendary, and Olivia D. Grace as well. And Mr. Greg Street, lead systems designer from World of Warcraft. How are you, sir?
I am outstanding. How are you guys?
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for coming on the show. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too.
So I know our time is limited. We're going to just jump into it and start firing as many questions as possible. So I hope you got your tinfoil hat, your flak armor, whatever you need.
I'll talk really fast.
All right, let's talk. Let's start out a little bit. Let's talk about 10 and 25 man ratings. So we've been covering this for quite a while on Legendary, and the world first races. I mean, they seem to be dominated by 25 man. Yet it seems that the 10 mans get more use amongst non-world first groups. So how do you feel? How do you feel about the balance right now between 10 and 25 man rating is going?
There's a lot of things to comment on there. I think the encounter designers did a really good job this time of keeping the balance fairly close. Sometimes in the past we would have players switch from 25 to 10 to beat a certain boss, then go back to 25, and that sucks. I feel like the balance has been a lot better. There are, I think everyone knows, there are a lot more 10-player rating groups out there, and we are big fans of 25. We don't want to see it go away. We are trying to come up with the right system of rewards to make up for the logistical hurdles of 25-player rating without killing 10s, because, like I said, 10s are really popular too. It's a huge challenge. I don't think we have the right answer yet, but it's something we keep working on.
You've talked a lot before on Twitter and on the forums as well about 15-man rating. Is that just kind of a, oh man, it'd be nice if something like this were to happen, or is that something that you think you'd ever actually do?
It would be a very scary change. If we went to 15-player rating, you were literally asking every rating player in the world to switch. And for the 10-player groups, you know, they're going to have to recruit 5 or 6 more guys, and the 25 players are going to have to recruit a bunch of people. So you can argue that 15 or 20 is like the perfect number, the sweet spot between logistics and responsibility and still feeling like an epic group, but man, I think that'd be a hard sell.
Let's talk a little bit about cross-realm zones. I mean, minus like the small bugs like the 2-player mount problems or the frame rate issues or anything like that. How do you think they're working now that they've been in for a little while? Are they working as intended?
I would say as a feature, we're still really bullish on the idea. I think it's a great idea. Technically, it's enormous, and I'm amazed those guys were able to pull it off. I think it's fair to say it got off on a bit of the wrong foot. Some players really don't like the idea, either because they feel like the bugs are unacceptable or because we know there's a contingent of players out there that actually like having zones all to themselves. It's not necessarily a great business model, but we know that's what they like, and now we're asking them to change. So my hope is that at some point in the future, cross-realm zones are just kind of something people have gotten used to and appreciate for the benefits they bring, such as having players around to group with or to at least see other players in the low-level zones. They're not the final answer for what to do about low-pop realms. We know there are still some outstanding technical issues, such as the 2-player vehicle mounts, dismounting people. That's all stuff we eventually want to fix, and we'll get there with any new technology. And this one is so crazy that it's kind of a miracle sometimes that it works at all. But I think we'll get to the point where it feels good and feels stable, and we're just not quite there yet.
Are you planning any other changes to sort of placate the very vocal players who are complaining about this feature? I mean, things that have been mentioned include stuff like mob tagging and increasing spawn rates and that sort of thing. Is there anything like that in the pipeline?
We talk a lot about that. I think one of the things that the daily quest experience in Myst has shown us is that competing with other players on your same faction for things like mob taps and nodes just kind of sucks. You should be excited when there's other players around, not grumpy because they're competing with you. And I don't know if the answer is just, okay, everything is shared tag, and when you mine Ghost Iron, it doesn't go away, and now everyone can mine it. I don't think that's necessarily the right answer, but I do think we're going to have to do something to make it more of a bonus when people are around rather than a bad thing. And of course, that would carry on to the competition in the lower level cross realm zones as well.
Do you think we'll ever see a time when servers are just completely gone? We're starting to see some other companies work on it. Do you think is that something that Blizzard is looking at as well?
I know we're looking at it. The challenge is it really doesn't make sense to shut down servers, then open them again, then shut them down, then open them again. And if we think that, okay, this server is really dead and has no hope, we might do something. And I know we have done that on occasion. But we just have to make sure that that's really that server's long-term fate. If we feel like, wow, all of a sudden population has swung up again. And it's probably not appropriate for me to go into subscriber numbers a lot and that sort of thing. But I think one myth that people have is that they're very stable. And they're not. They actually fluctuate a lot over time. And so we can have a lot of people come back for a new patch, and then we can have a lot of people leave when they're waiting for the next patch. And so constantly shutting down and starting servers again doesn't make a ton of sense. But at the same time, it's not a great experience to be all alone on a dying realm with a dead auction house and not enough players to join your guild. And we do need to find a solution for those people.
Not really the MMO experience as intended.
Totally, exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about dailies. Some players are kind of feel that the dailies in MOP, particularly in 5.0, have been, well, somewhat mandatory, especially for raiding. Would you agree to that?
Well, Josh Allen loves them, right? So we're good.
So does Olivia.
We're all big fans. We're all big fans here.
Like with many things, I think we overdid it a little bit. The core experience, I think, is still a good one, that players are out in the world. Whenever you log in, there's always something to do. You're not out of ideas of how to explore the game. If we could do it all again, I think we would have had... these are just a couple of examples. For the Golden Lotus, you unlock an area, and then as you progress through the rep, it unlocks a second and a third area. We could have just had the second area replace the first area, so that getting to the next plateau of Golden Lotus was exciting because now you have options rather than, oh god, now I have to do even more quests before I can finish for the day. I think, for example, the August Celestial and the Shadowpan have fewer quests, and they're a little bit faster to finish. Golden Lotus and Klaxi both have tons and tons of quests, and I think that really risks burning players out. Fairly quickly after we launched, we lowered the rep requirements of some gear pieces down, and if we had shipped like that, and perhaps with even more things at friendly or with no rep at all, then people would feel like they had some options to spend their Valor on without having to get all the way to Revered before they really started having fun. So now that, like, my characters are up there, Revered or Exalted with most of the factions, and I think it feels a lot better now. I can get on, I can do some daily quests if I'm low on charms, I can do them if I'm just 5 Valor away from the cap, but I don't feel like there's that job of, okay, let's crank to the dailies before we can go do something else.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that we've been hearing a great deal of is people are really struggling with their alts. I mean, it's kind of, there's a balance to be achieved, I think, between the goal of having something for people who have one character to do and something for people who have several characters to do. And then I know that you've introduced the Grand Commendations recently, but are you thinking forward to any other ways to make it easier for people's alts to get up and geared and get reputation?
Yeah.
It still seems quite arduous.
No, it does. I mean, if you look back at the history of World of Warcraft, what often happened was players would kind of finish whatever they were doing, whether it was leveling a character, capping a trade skill, finishing a raid, and then they would roll up an alt as something else to do to engage in the game. With Mists, a real goal for us was to make sure you never run out of stuff to do, which is awesome if you're the guy with 1 character, and horrible if you're the person with 10 characters. I think we're going to have to do more to make the game a little more alt-friendly. Our fear is that we do something like, let's go to the extreme of, okay, now all Valor is shared, and all reps are shared, the way achievements and mounts are shared. What if we reach a point where there isn't so much for players to do, and now everyone has a whole realm, 11 characters, all maxed out, and they can't roll any more alts, or even if they could, they don't want to, because, God, they've got one of every character now. And so they kind of lose playing their alt as a viable way to play the game. We don't want to lose that part. That we think that's really important, but it's totally unreasonable to expect players to max out even 4 or 5 characters right now.
Let's talk a little bit about rep tabards. So I've noticed that Zarheim has commented on the forums a bit, and I've also seen you hinting a little bit on Twitter that rep tabards might be making a return. Anything to add to this? Any update?
Yeah, so, you know, this is not an official announcement. It's entirely possible it won't come to pass, but an idea we kind of like is that when you do your first dungeon or your first scenario of the day and you get that Valor bonus, that you could also get a rep bonus for doing it, which would let players make slow progress towards a particular faction without the experience of, well, I put on a tabard, so no matter what I do, I'm making progress in that faction without actually ever engaging with the faction NPCs or visiting the quartermaster or anything like that. So hopefully that'll feel like a little bit of a compromise to players who just hate dailies or are sick of them or want a motivation to run more scenarios or dungeons.
No, you've been on Twitter a lot lately as well. You're all over the Twitter these days. How's that working out for you?
I said I kind of like Twitter as a medium. I put it off for a long time, and I blame John for getting me into it finally. But I mean, as you guys know, one of the problems I always faced on the forums was a player wrote 17 paragraphs and is kind of wanting an answer to every single issue they bring up, which would take me an hour to compose that response. And this is like one of hundreds of posts that go up every day. And you know, I just don't have the bandwidth to do that, and nobody here does. And we could hire new people whose sole job is to answer questions in the forums, but unless they're super informed, they're going to have to do that by coming to the developers and asking, well, how should I answer this? So that's not a huge time savings there. The nice thing about Twitter is everyone is forced to stay at this very high level of, you know, hey, do you think this is broken, or what are your thoughts on this, without having to like, well, you didn't really answer question number 17, which was the most important one for all of us. So, I mean, it's not an ideal medium. Everyone knows Twitter's limitations, but it's just one more thing we have in our arsenal of ways to communicate to the player base.
Yeah, it seems like quite a new thing to just have the one-to-one like interaction between, you know, the fan or the player and the developers, which is a great thing. Any plans on that if it's been successful to kind of branch that out and have more of the Blizzard team on Twitter?
And we've kind of left it up to them, I think, for people that are interested or insane enough to venture out there. I don't think it's just, you know, a matter of requiring people to go onto Twitter or anything like that. But I really like the one-on-one communication with players. One of the things I always love about BlizzCon is just getting to talk so quickly with so many different people, and that's really a difficult experience to have otherwise. You know, email isn't really the right medium, and the forums don't work out for that. And Twitter captures a little of that feeling.
So you've been also tweeting a lot about class balance and how you're saying it's not reasonable to rely on parses and sims for it. So I guess the question we have is, so how does Blizzard actually gather their data for balance then, and how are you actually putting it to use?
We do actually like parses a lot. You just have to be careful looking at parses. Players will link, say, the top 100, which often just shows the guy that got 100 crits in a row and got lucky, or they will show, well, look. As one example, Beastmaster does 50k more damage than Marksman. Well, that's probably not it. It probably is just a sampling bias that all the good players are playing Beastmaster. The people playing Marks are messing around or don't know what they're doing, and so the damage tends to be lower. Arcane and Frost took a huge jump when we nerfed Fire, which was probably not Arcane and Frost. It was probably just players are branching out and trying more things now. The risk with the simulations is they're only as good as the amount of effort that players put into them. And we know kind of secondhand that some components of the various sim packages are really, really good and do a good job at modeling those specs, but others are kind of neglected. And it's difficult for us to kind of stay up to speed with like, well, do we know if the Hunter component is really good? Are there bugs in the Paladin system? And it becomes a second job for us to vet everyone's sims. So instead, we just kind of say, you know, use the simulations to talk about what should my rotation be, or how should I gem? But they're really bad for stack ranking. We saw one recently that got thrown around to me a lot on Twitter, like, look, Fire Mages are now dead last, which I find really, really hard to believe. Internally, we do have simulations. Our simulations are pretty good because we actually know the actual numbers and all the rules that go into them. We do a lot of automated testing as well. The risk with automated testing is we know it's unrealistic to expect a human to perform as well as a computer. And in fact, sometimes players figure out ways to improve upon our rotations. Like, oh, well, if you use Rupture this way, you actually can get more DPS out of it. But we go to parses a lot. We really like getting them from the really talented guilds who sometimes don't share them with the general public because they're still working on progression or something like that.
What about class balance in terms you're talking about like the talented guilds here? What about class balance as it relates to encounter design? And a lot of times we'll see fights that come up where we'll just say, okay, well, arcane mages are just really good for this fight, or retribution paladins are really, I don't remember what fight that would be, but I'd love to see a fight where retribution paladins are just really good. But how does that relate to just like standing still single target DPS, and how do you sort of factor that in?
It's a really good question. It's actually something we discuss just all the time. I don't think it's cool if a class is just abysmal. If they really feel like, you know what, guys, you're better off just replacing me with some undergeared guy because I'm so terrible in this fight. But we do think it's cool when people get their moment to shine. Like, okay, this is a cleave fight. Combat rogues are going to be amazing. This is a dot fight. Affliction warlocks are really going to feel awesome. It's hard to offer that for every single spec in the game. We only have 16 bosses, and 16 bosses is a huge tier. So it's hard to say, like, well, where's the elemental shaman? Where's the dual wield frost DK moment to shine? So instead, we just try to have a wide variety of encounters. I still think it's more important to have fun encounters than it is to go down the list of like, okay, where's the ad fight? Where's the cleave fight? Where's the single target patchwork fight? And you know, the encounter designers are right down the hall. We talk to them all the time about, you know what? This class ability is going to really break this encounter. Should we address it on the class side? Should we address it on the encounter side? Things like that. As much as players ask for it, I don't think they would really ultimately want a 34-way tie, or even if you just took the DPS specs on every fight. I think it's fun when there's variation. It just sucks if you're the guy who's always dragging the bottom and you feel like there's nothing you can do to make up for it.
You mentioned there's 16 bosses in this tier. How do you think the raid size has been working out? Because it's obviously, I mean, that's twice as many as there were in Dragon Soul.
Yeah, you know, there isn't a lot of downside to larger tiers except for production time for us. So as long as we can deliver on it, I think they work out better. I think this one in particular worked out well because it wasn't just a fake gate halfway through the raid. It was, okay, you're going to a completely different building in a different zone, and that's the new raid. So even though we locked them away, it didn't feel artificially gated, even though it's a freaking, you know, it's a fantasy game that only exists on the computer anyway. But so I think that worked out really well. I don't know that we can do that every single tier, but we definitely want to keep having large raid tiers. 16 is a lot. It may not be 16 every time, but hopefully you won't see a 5 or 6 boss tier ever again.
Yeah, I think a slide from this has been an amazing tier so far, and then a slide from this into a sort of Firelands-esque smaller tier would probably be quite a kick for players and motivation.
Yeah, totally agree.
Let's talk about the LFR for a bit and the new world boss loot system. So it's been in place for what, like 2 months now. How do you feel it's been working out?
I think it's been pretty good. It's cut down a lot on any of the drama you have where, dude, I've been trying to farm this boss for 6 years and you got the item on your first try. Clearly you should trade it to me. We know there are people that would be happy to trade. You know, they're generous. They already have an item they won't use. But overall, given that you're throwing a bunch of anonymous strangers together, it's nice to just be mad at Blizzard for the loot drops rather than mad at another player who won't trade it to you. There's still some improvements we can make. It's a little awkward right now if you want to... I want to raid as Ret, but I really want to gear up my Holy set. That's kind of hard. Raid Finder doesn't offer that well yet. But I think overall, it's a keeper. We talk a lot about, is it the right design for Dungeon Finder or not? And we haven't quite decided on that yet.
How do you feel about like occasionally... a lot of players are complaining about, oh, I got this item again out of Raid Finder. I got these bracers again off of this boss. I really needed the trinket or something, but I got the weapon again. I've already gotten that. How do you feel about that sort of situation that you see people complaining about from time to time?
Random loot can definitely be frustrating when it works against you, but we know the content just won't have staying power. If you go in and the first time you kill a boss, you get the item you want, and every boss you kill, you get the item you want, and then you're done in 2 runs. So I think there's going to have to be frustrating moments sometimes when you don't get an awesome item and you come back next week and hopefully you get it then. That's kind of a tradition for games like this. We have talked about some type of option where, you know, dude, I kept getting the same bracer over and over again where the game says, hey, do you want the bracer or do you want a shot at door number 2 or, you know, do you want a bag instead or something?
So kind of like a greater charm sort of situation where maybe this bracer drop that you don't necessarily need again, but you can do a roll to maybe get another shot at something else instead.
Yeah, I think
like add a lesser charm.
Yeah, I think that something else would have to be a consolation prize. Otherwise, we're just letting players gear up faster, which I know feels awesome. But...
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned Dungeon Finder there, the 5-man group sizes. Is there any intention to implement a similar, even just a class spec specific role system like you had in the Cataclysm version of Raid Finder in Dungeons in 5-man content?
Yeah, we'd like to do something like that. We're still struggling with the right design for that feature. If we just implemented the Raid Finder system whole cloth, we would have troubles because the 5-player boss loot tables are not deep enough to support that. Like, there are bosses that don't have anything for Elemental Shaman. What are you supposed to give them? But overall, we like the way it works, where there's less drama. It would still have the problem where, gosh, I really want to gear up my tanking set. How am I supposed to run as an undergeared tank in order to get better tank gear? That problem's even greater in Dungeon Finder since people use it as their stepstone into raids and later content.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing that people have been asking quite a lot is the possibility of, since you made the changes to PvP power and PvP resilience as additional stats on pieces, and there have been some complaints about, well, not complaints, observations, let's say, about people saying that the best way to gear for PvE at the moment is actually to run arenas and rated battlegrounds to obtain conquest gear. I mean, is that, do you agree with that? And B, is that something that you're looking at?
It depends. The PvP gear is more dependable in that you know, okay, if I grind up X Honor, X Conquest, I can get the item and I'm not subject to RNG. The item levels are lower, so if you're getting a Conquest piece and trying to raid with it, it's lower item level than a raid piece of the same power. We like that there's a little bit of crossover. That used to be one of the fun parts of the game is, you know what, I've got a great set of PvP gear. I can go and do endgame PvE content. I won't be quite as good as the guy in full raid gear, but I'll be okay. And likewise, it was always fun to get your raiding gear and then go into a battleground and actually be able to do some damage. In the past, you know, people will be quick to point out, we've had the problem, it's been too extreme with things like weapons and trinkets, where the PvE versions were just so good that even PvP players wanted to get them. And we'd really like it to feel secondary, but a viable alternative as long as it's secondary.
Let's talk a little bit about the... Oh, go ahead, Olivia.
No, I was just going to say, I think that part of the thing is with the conquest rate of acquisition being so much higher and the cap being quite considerably higher per week as well, that the item upgrade system for conquest means that you can actually get your conquest gear to a higher item level than the, maybe not the new factions gear, but certainly the daily gear from the existing factions.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Just because the rate of upgrading, even though the raiding gear would eventually be better, the conquest gear can get to a higher item level faster.
Yeah, and you can literally just build it up faster. It's quicker to build. The caps are higher.
Yeah, that might be legitimate. I'm not sure it's a problem. We'll have to kind of see the behavior and see how it goes. If it's for PvP players who want to use that conquest gear for PvP and it can also work in PvE, that's awesome. What we wouldn't want to do is have PvE players feel like, well, got to go grind up this PvP gear that I don't give a shit about. I think that would feel bad.
Yeah.
How's the new talent system working out? Because I know you talked a lot about, you know, trying to get away from cookie cutter builds, and that was one of the main goals of creating the new talent system. How's that working out?
I'd say overall it's working out pretty well. We actually have a meeting today later on where we're going to start analyzing for 5.2. Okay, what are the talents that just nobody takes, or what are the talents that everyone takes? And are they taking it because the other ones suck? Are they taking it because they're often in a situation where it's useful, or because it's easy, or whatever? I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. There are definitely some tiers that look great, and all 3 talents are getting used, and there's kind of theory crafting debates on the best one, and players swap in and out of them all the time. Then there are some that, like, every player has X, and I think that isn't really delivering on what we promised the feature would be, and we kind of owe it to players to take a look at those and try to un-cookie cutter them where possible. I think overall the feature's a great success, and I've heard much less since we shipped than we heard before we ship, where players like, oh god, dumbing the game down, talents are going to suck now. Seems like we've won over some of the players who felt that way.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of tiers. Like I know a couple of the complaints that come to mind, like There's two like non-lethal rogue poisons that you can take in separate tiers of the rogue talent system. So it's like if you take one of those, then you can't really use the other one anyway. But then turning around and looking at my paladin, for example, there's like the end tier, especially in PvE, the final tier. You're kind of swapping between at least two of them. Do you feel like it's at least okay if it's just two of them that you're swapping between, or is it something that you really want all three of them to be viable options for everybody?
Our rule of thumb is particularly like within, say, PvP, there should be two viable options, or for a holy paladin, there should be two viable options. If we can deliver on three, that's awesome. But it kind of sucks if you look at a 100% or 99% of protection paladins pick this talent. You know, they pick Light's Hammer instead of Execution Sentence. Then we don't think that's really fair to players, and we owe it to them to try to make the others more competitive.
Yeah, I mean, like Josh, I know that sort of, again, the classes I play are slightly different to the classes Josh plays, but definitely one particular tier of elemental shaman talents, and restoration shaman talents, the totem modification tier, which I believe is the level 45 tier. There's one talent that everyone takes. But then looking at the latter tiers, there's far better stuff, and particularly the priest talents for the PvP side of things have been a funny mixture of cookie cutter and awesome. I mean, how do you work this for hybrid classes? And that has got to be a difficult thing where they're prioritizing one particular skill over another, like particularly paladins and druids.
Oh, it's totally hard. And then we're even okay with a talent that isn't used commonly, but sometimes you really want it because it's awesome in certain situations. I mean, even that feels okay. And that's much harder to measure. Like, you can't just look at stats to be like, well, nobody has this talent when they logged off. You know, maybe they took the talent for an hour and then swapped out of it again. That's still a better situation than the talent that is literally a dead talent and no one in their right mind would ever take it.
Yeah.
How do you feel let's talk a little about PvP balance. So, I mean, do you think PvP balance can actually ever be achieved? I mean, it's really hard to balance like duels and 2v2s to a lesser extent, but for larger comps, do you think it's achievable?
I think it's achievable enough to where players can have fun. I mean, I agree that it's never going to be perfect where you literally have a 50% chance of winning and losing any engagement no matter what. I don't think it's there yet in Mist. I think we still have some work to do to get to the point where people go into a threes or rated battlegrounds or something and say, you know what, that felt fair. I lost, but I understand why I lost. I can play better next time. It's really, really hard, particularly as we keep adding classes and adding mechanics to the game to balance it, which is not trying to weasel out of it. It's hard, but we want to, again, we owe it to players to get it right.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, how do you think the stat changes, talking about PvP power and PvP resilience again, how do you think they're working out for you? I mean, I know that from my role as a sort of PvP writer at WoW Insider, I've been seeing a ton of complaints about the changes that you've very recently made in 5.2 to PvP power. And how are those stats working for you?
I think the design overall has been really solid. It allows us to keep the PvP item level lower while still making it effectively higher item level when you're in PvP. It's given us a lot of knobs to turn in that direction. I think the higher baseline resilience feels really good as well. I wish we had come out the gate with the higher conquest, the higher PvP power on the conquest weapons. That was ultimately the right call, and we just missed it. So when we added it in 5.1, then all of a sudden damage jumped up, and then anyone who upgraded their conquest weapon, damage jumped up again. So even though we nerfed some of the big outliers in 5.1, damage overall still went up a little bit, which then kind of felt crappy compared to our goal of trying to lower the burst. So we're still talking about that. It's possible we will increase base resilience or something to compensate. We just wanted to give it more than 3 days of battlegrounds before we decided, okay, damage is too high. Because I mean, most players in their right mind are going to upgrade their weapon if they have a decent weapon. Then they're probably going to upgrade their trinkets, and then they'll start looking at other pieces of armor which have a better mix of power and resilience. So their defenses will go up a little bit as they keep improving their gear. This is hopefully the worst it's going to be, which again doesn't mean we won't do anything, but we know over time it'll get better.
What about the recent change to PvP power for hybrid classes with the off-spec healing, where it kind of went from it was obviously a I'll say rather strong before, where
The Ret Paladin.
yeah, where well my choose team is Enhancement Shaman and Retribution Paladin, and we would burst someone like crazy, and then if we didn't kill them inside the burst, we'd fall back and just heal ourselves like crazy. And it was obviously something that was working for us a little too well before.
Right.
But now it almost feels like with the change to PvP power going from full benefit to no benefit at all for the healing, it almost feels like we don't have, like, our self-healing almost doesn't even matter anymore. Is that something that you guys are like, what are your thoughts on that so far?
I'll probably get this number wrong, but I want to say that taking PvP power off of healing was like a 20 or 30% nerf to those heals. So it's big, but it's not like 200% or my heals are now worthless. Players tend to always go from one extreme till it was useful to now it's totally gutted and I'll never ever use Flash Heal again. We'll definitely keep an eye on it. We talked about maybe the hybrid should get 50% of PvP power instead of 0 for their off-roll damage or healing. Just kind of want to make sure we're addressing the problem first. It's awesome for Ret to throw out some heals to help their group. It's less awesome when Ret is like the healer for the team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think possibly with the unfortunate sort of coincidence that you happen to also buff the damage at the same time, that healing is feeling less effective than it is, despite the fact that it's not actually as bad as it all seems.
Yeah,
How about, I mean, what's your position? I know there's been an awful lot of, again, traffic in the PvP forums talking about the problems which they feel have been brought in with gear escalation. So people who were starting off, again, we're going back to talking about alts here as well. People who were starting off early in the season and are getting ahead with the gear versus the people who are starting late season and are unable to catch up. How do you feel that's working out?
I think we need to offer something to help the PvP players with alts. I mean, like you said, it is a little faster to get all the conquest you need for a week than it is to raid to get all the valor you need for a week, but that still feels crappy for the guy that has 3 or 4 PvP characters that they want to gear up. We just need to, I joked about Conquest the Ancients or something like that to help that make it feel a little better. It will make it a little harder for someone who joins Mists of Pandaria halfway through who has no gear to now get fully upgraded Conquest gear to compete with the bad boys. But we also were just hearing from PvP players, I earn all this Conquest points even after I've maxed out my gear and I want to do something with it. And we know if you like PvP, you might just keep playing PvP because it's fun, but we also know that rewards are really intrinsic to the RPG experience, that players kind of lose interest quickly when they're not getting new rewards. And we thought that this is a way of hey, that bracer, it's not providing a whole lot of stats, but if you upgrade that bracer, it'll provide a few more stats.
What about how PvP balancing can end up affecting PvE from time to time? I know that's been a long discussion over the years in World of Warcraft. How do you guys feel, especially with now the PvP resilience and PvP power in place, how are you guys feeling about how you're managing to pull off balancing something and fixing it in PvP without necessarily adversely affecting PvE balance?
I feel like the team has gotten a lot better at it. A lot of the changes we made in 5.1 to classes were PvP nerfs, maybe a few buffs. A lot of them are nerfs. Most of those don't have a big PvE impact. We tried to be smart about how we changed the mechanics. When it comes down to it, things like Taste for Blood for warriors, we just said, look, it can't stack that high in PvP because it's a balance problem. And we'll keep looking at things like that. Often changing burst damage to sustained damage doesn't have a huge PvE impact. It will, of course, when there's a DPS check and you have to kill something right now, then it's an actual nerf to shift damage from burst to sustained.
Greg, thanks so much for coming on the show off of your busy press junket.
Anytime. It's really fun.
Yeah, this was great. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Thanks to Olivia. Thanks to Josh. Thanks to Zarheim for setting everything up and working behind the scenes with everything. Let's do this again.
Yeah, totally. I'd love to.
Make sure to watch Legendary live every single Thursday at 8 p.m. PST. And come over to GameBreaker every day, all day for all your video game news. Keep it locked and dialed in right here, and we will see you next time.